Welcome to Our Montana. I'm Mike Penfold. I've got what I think is, it's certainly to me and to most of you in Montana, a very important briefing. It has to do with 85% of you in this state who think conservation is important, and almost half of you believe that hunting and fishing is an important part of your life. We have a state that many of us live in because of the heritage of great landscapes, great opportunities to our outdoor recreation and hunting and fishing. It's important to us. And when we feel threatened about that, we think it's time for doing some action. I got kind of watching the Queen of England's funeral. And it got me thinking about what our legacy is in the United States. We the people, which is what our Constitution says. And part of that legacy is we the people own what the king did in England. We own the wildlife, and we own the public land where it's public. And then I got to thinking about our state constitution. It starts out, we the people. And in that constitution, it tells us that we should secure a healthful environment for ourselves into the future. And sometimes these things start looking like they're fraying. And then that's the time when citizen action is really appropriate. And I'm very proud to have a couple of gentlemen to me who have volunteered and are doing some yeoman work in looking after the heritage we have in hunting, particularly. And so we're going to have a good conversation here, and I've got Jeff Herbert and Jock Conyngham. Welcome, guys. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having us.
So Jock, you had some kind of an excuse about being out hunting this morning, and how big was that elk you let go by?
A big 6x6, and I've gotten elk with more points. This was the biggest frame I have ever been close to, and I was about 12 yards from him this morning. And I had a 10 o'clock cutoff time in my mind to stop hunting, go home, take a shower, and I drew back on him at 10:30.
Oh my gosh! And you got here.
And I got here. It really took a lot to let down. I let down. He walked. He gave a little bunny hop and walked away. And I thought, okay, I know right where you are. But anything for you in conservation, Mike.
Thanks, Jock. This is why we live here. Now, Jock, your background is river conservation and analysis.
River restoration and river science. Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, I'm glad to have you here, Jeff. I know you're a wildlife biologist, and you worked for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks for a whole career.
Correct.
And retired a few years ago. So now you guys have started this coalition. Jeff, tell me what you're doing and why.
It's a great question, and we appreciate being here. I think the best way to describe it maybe is that it was a culmination of the 2021 legislative session where we thought there were some things that were done that were certainly not in the interest of the public trust, and public voices were not listened to. And then that was coupled with a season-setting process by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and decisions made by the commission, particularly as they relate to elk, which is a complex topic to talk about. And what we just saw were a lot of people that were really upset, pissed off in many cases.
They were.
And we should clarify, it wasn't Jeff and I that started this thing. It was
that's important.
It was several dozen people who came together initially and said, this has got to change. We have to draw a line in the sand. That was, anyone who followed the activities of the legislative session just saw a tsunami of bills, many redundant or at least overlapping, which I don't think was coincidental. And those of us who regularly get involved with public processes, you just couldn't keep up with the details, let alone coming and testifying
Yeah.
on all those
Well,
bills.
a typical year would be several dozen bills facing Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
Sportsman issues or
Sportsman's
conservation issues, and normally the conservation community and different advocacy groups sort of divide them up and divide and if not conquer, try to be efficient in their approach, and it was drinking from a fire hose,
Oh, boy.
and let alone some of the individual episodes where hunters and anglers would prepare testimony, drive a good long ways, take time out of their private lives, and of course they're not paid for this, go to give testimony, but the bills that they were going to testify on were being changed as they drove, which is it's certainly a violation of the open meeting
Yeah.
clause of the state constitution in spirit, if not in letter. So people were furious, and we decided we have to bring some form and direction to this.
So what'd you do? How'd you pull this together?
Well, we had a number of meetings. Each meeting we seemed to kind of home in on something a little more specific about what to do. I mean, it's a great question. How are we relevant, and what do we do?
How are you going to be relevant?
Yep. And so the work group got a little bit smaller in size as time went on, as they typically do. But it was, to begin with, as Jock said, it was a very wide assortment of organizations that were there. There were 35 or 40 people at the first meeting.
Is this Republican and Democrat?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. It was
Very much so.
nonpartisan. I mean, it was across the board that folks were angry. And what we eventually arrived at that made sense to us and made sense to us because of some of the input that we got from a variety of folks was to focus on a couple of things. And the first was the value of our Constitution, which really sets this state apart.
Yes.
And it speaks, as you said, to a clean and healthful environment,
Yes.
which we all subscribe to, and a heritage of hunting and fishing that is spoken to directly in the Constitution.
You think people are trying to turn that over?
I think it is certainly a topic of discussion,
Yeah.
and there's quite a bit of concern that might happen. And so as we moved along, we focused even more specifically then on the Constitution and upholding the oath of a Constitution by elected officials, and developed a commitment statement that had a focus on the public trust, on our fish and wildlife heritages and hunting heritage, and as well as public lands and public waters.
And that statement is for candidates.
So it's a statement you want candidates to look at.
Yes.
Tell me, when you say
Right.
public trust, what are you talking about?
The public trust is different people define it a little bit differently, but as part of the North American model of wildlife management, the United States really departed from Europe and other countries where wildlife and fish are owned by the public, literally. And
Well, they were owned by the king.
they were owned by the king, or I was lucky. I got to do a semester in Sweden when I was an undergrad, and I fell in with a guy who worked for a Swedish hunting and fishing magazine and did a lot of bird hunting with him, and he was all excited. One time he said, "I got you invited on a deer hunt." I said, "Well, that's great. And frankly, I could really use the meat. Everything in Sweden was so expensive." He said, "Well, Jock, you have to pay to go on this hunt." I said, "Well, how much?" And I don't remember what it was, $100, $200. Well, and I immediately went to, what do these deer dress out as? How big are the deer?
So doing calculation.
And this guy said, "Jock, if you kill a deer, you have to buy it from the farmer. So it may not be owned by the king, it's owned by the landowner in the case of many European countries. I know Germany, you have to pay the landowner if you want to take home your wild boar, your stag, or ducks, or whatever you shot there. But more broadly, it refers to public lands, public waters, literally water in rivers and lakes is part of the public trust, and its quality and its quantity are part of the public trust. Something that we enjoy in abundance in Montana, there are 30 million acres of public land in Montana, and it's sort of our second paycheck. Many of us take a pay cut to be here, but we get to enjoy these spectacular resources and this world-class hunting and fishing. And a friend of ours, and somebody you might know, Mike, Greg Munther, who's
Oh my gosh.
what a rabble-rouser.
Well, he's a rabble-rouser. He's a troublemaker. I mean, if you ever get him off the fishing streams,
If you know Greg well, and one of his mantras is, every day there's somebody trying to take these resources away from you. Every day the legislature's in session, every day when it's not in session, somebody is pecking away at these rights. And he's right. He's absolutely right.
Don't they understand?
That last legislative session,
Yeah.
that was a runaway train that proved his point.
You mentioned the North American model. What does that mean? I guess public trust is part of it, huh?
Well, it was actually developed over time. A couple of maybe some of the original thinkers were Val Geist and Jim Posowitz.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, Jim.
And basically, what as Jock was saying, I mean, this evolved from Roman times, and the current conservation model, as it is conceived, it's got some like 7 tenets, say, and it is a democratic opportunity for all to participate. So economic status doesn't dictate.
So everybody gets a chance.
Yeah,
Right.
an equal chance.
Equal chance.
And it's based on science. And it speaks to not commercializing harvest, which is what really put us in a bad spot to begin with from a state standpoint, with everything getting depopulated in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And we built that back, and we built that back on the basis of those things with state management and in combination with federal management at times. The Pittman-Robertson Fund and the DJ Fund, which have been in the news lately.
Yeah.
PR funding is a tax willingly paid by hunters and shooters on ammunition and other supplies.
And that big boon, hasn't it, not for habitat protection and access,
science and science-based
science management.
Yeah, it's huge.
So you were a professional game management manager. You're trained in that. Do you think that some of the key decisions are being taken away from the people who were so critical in restoring our wildlife populations? How do you see that?
Well, I see two things. I see good science being ignored, and I also see the public's voice being not listened to. And both of those are key. One of the things in my mind, and from my experience, that really sets Montana apart is that the citizens of this state have been integrally involved in the restoration of wildlife and the continued success that we have seen from a conservation standpoint, unlike other states, the degree to which they're involved. They're at legislative sessions, they're at commission meetings, they're on the front lines. And
the legislature itself is a citizen legislature.
yes.
As
Yes.
opposed to some states.
Yeah, we're a citizen-driven.
Yep.
Right.
So it's and people across the board, private landowners, traditional private landowners have been fundamental to the success. It's not just public land. There's a
Well, we've got a pretty good block management system in the state, which is where private landowners are really helping. The private landowners don't own the game that's on that land, do they?
Correct.
So we own it.
There's Yeah, we own it, but we don't own it, and maybe the way to think about it is we own it for future generations. And it really, instead of having a fiduciary responsibility like a financial trust would have, in my mind, there's a stewardship responsibility with this for making sure that those resources are conserved in ways that are sustainable for future generations.
Kind of a trust for stewardship.
Yep, very much so.
So the hazard is a legislature that starts doing what?
They start to disassemble the model, I believe, and some of the outcomes are looking backwards. To spend $1 million on a pheasant stocking program is unbelievable for me when we proved long ago that is a really costly journey with very low return on the expenditure.
Negative return on investment, really.
Yeah.
And particularly at a time of avian flu and episodes of poor hunter ethics, and it just the department's own biologists came out against it. The 80% of the public comment was against it. And I think it had been pushed through even before it was announced. It was a done deal where public input there was a gesture made towards public input. But
so who was benefiting from it? Who was pushing for it?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
I am trying to find that out right now. It's
but it wasn't the general public, was it?
You hear, barstool rumors and so forth, but it creates some employment for the prisoners at Deer Lodge, where the program's based. But Pittman Robertson money shouldn't be going
to a program
to Deer Lodge.
Yeah. To a program that's
it's not for
effective.
Prisoner welfare or employment, and there are other things. The fact that the rules were changed. So the Wilkes brothers bought a fantastic ranch in an area that's limited draw for both residents and non-residents.
For bull elk.
For bull elk, yes. And they are apparently major donors, and now the rules are different. They get assured tags.
So there's been a lot of concern about, the North American model doesn't provide for market hunting, does it?
Right.
Or sale to individuals for the public's wildlife. So, but we've got places where we've got too many elk. And so what's going on with these tags? It's causing so much concern.
Well, I think a couple of things. One is, that's elk management. Effective elk management is about as complex as wildlife management can get on a Western landscape.
Yeah.
All the working parts are brought to bear, and so you have a statutory responsibility held by the department to manage at objective levels. You have a requirement of hunters to participate under the regulations that are established to do that. Yeah. But you really don't have, and landowners, depending on their preference and their desire in terms of how they manage their ranch, which is their call, either can participate in that or not, but they're not held accountable from a statutory standpoint.
I see.
And commercial outfitters certainly are not. Mm-hmm. So it's a real complex issue that really raises the temperature.
But if I can simplify it a little bit,
yeah.
You ask a professional a question and you get an accurate, complex answer.
Well, give me a less than accurate one.
And to go back to your original point about the need to control elk populations where they're exploding and doing real agricultural damage and so forth, that has nothing to do with shooting bulls.
No.
It has everything to do with shooting cows,
Yeah.
where all the reproductive potential is.
Yeah.
And yet, most of these rule changes are about bull tags and a move towards I think one of the hard lines we really need to draw on the ground is transferable bull tags, where landowners are given N number of bull tags, and they can be sold to outfitters, they can be given to friends, they can go to family, it's at the landowner's decision in their power to do with what they will. And I think that's fine up to the point of transferability, because then it becomes a commodity to go out on the open market and play with. And at that point, there are a lot of CEOs and .com wealth that can pay a lot more for a bull hunt than anybody in this room.
That sounds like selling wildlife.
It is.
To me, John.
That's exactly what it is.
So I'm a landowner, and I say, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, what do I get? I want a ticket, or what do I want? What am I asking for?
A tag.
A tag. I have a tag. Now, if you give me, how many tags can I get? I've got a lot of elk on my property.
It's a really good question.
Yeah, how many tags?
It varies, and there's been some jockeying and negotiating back and forth where if you allow N number of the public, instead of the old block management, or the current block management program, you allow N number of public hunters onto your land, or maybe not public hunters. This is also actually, in most cases, hunters that the individual landowner can select. But they get a cow tag. The bull tags are what is highly desirable for the outfitters,
and I can sell that bull tag to.
You can. Well, Jeff, I should be careful. You probably.
Well, right now the tags would be offered to friends, relatives, paying clients. It depends, and.
Well, say I'm willing to buy it. I want to get a big elk. Can I go to you as a rancher and say, can I have one of your tags, and this is what I'll pay for it?
Well, that's really the prescription under Ranching for Wildlife, and that is a transferability.
So we're not for transferability.
No, and I think, and maybe even to kind of circle back on the efforts here. Commercialization and privatization are very much a concern, and it goes beyond the average person's means to participate when it goes down that road. And I think what we're asking with this effort is we're acknowledging that things like Habitat Montana, which is habitat conservation program that's the envy of other states.
Yeah, it's been a really good program for
block management. The number of programs that are kind of under threat right now with the way things are going and the actions of the legislature, including a lawsuit that is explicitly saying that the legislature ought to make fish and wildlife management decisions. Should be vested there and not in a commission.
Power away from the commission.
We want the professionals to make these decisions. That's the.
And so I think, if you then come back full circle, what we're doing with this effort is trying to we are putting in front of the public to sign on as grassroots sponsors. This is a grassroots effort. We're not asking for money. It's a shoestring budget.
You guys are volunteers, aren't you?
Yep. And the intent is with the concise statement that we have on the website, the Montana Public Trust Coalition website, is a commitment as a candidate that if elected, they uphold their oath of office, which includes support of the Constitution,
a clean and healthful environment,
and the fishing and hunting heritage that we enjoy.
The public trust shall not be diminished or deteriorated. I've forgotten the precise wording right now. And that includes some of this talk about sale and transfer of public lands. And then also, just to clarify, that is for candidates. Then there's a separate area where any member of the public or statewide elected official. Monica Tronell just signed it. Steve Bullock signed it. But anyone can endorse this effort with a signature and a statement of support, and they're all available on the website.
Getting some Republican support too?
It's been, this is, and Jock practices what we're preaching here. This was really intended to be nonpartisan. I mean, we've got Mark Roscoe, and we have Bob Brown as sponsors, and there are a number of people that have signed on that are lifelong Republicans, and they're just really upset with the way things are going. So
Gary Buchanan, an independent, I understand he signed it.
Independents, one libertarian.
So,
and I hope more. And I hope more, because this is, I think one individual I spoke to said, well, you know, some of these groups that you seem to be affiliated with are kind of identified Democrat, and that's a whole separate issue. I think we have designed this. We want it to be bipartisan.
yeah. You're calling it a pledge?
a commitment.
A commitment.
A campaign.
So you got to kind of sound like reasonable things for Republicans or Democrats to support in a state like Montana, where 85% of the people want this kind of thing, and most of us, more than half of us, almost half of us hunt and fish.
And for many, I mean, it's really why many people are grateful to live here and raise their kids here. But certainly, by any measure, whether you like it or not, a lot of people moving in and a lot of businesses relocating to Montana, they're coming because Montana has things that other states have lost. All that public trust, all that high-quality land, high-quality hunting and fishing opportunity, world-class hunting and fishing opportunity. That's how, a .com hires its top employees.
So just to clarify that, so what have you got as a website? How are you contacting legislators and other people? Is it by, hopefully this program will key some things, but so somebody sees this and they say, hey, I like what these guys are doing. What do they do?
Well, if you go to the website, you can
Which is the
Public Trust, Montana Public Trust Coalition.com. And the homepage will come up. It has the commitment that we're talking about. It has kind of a landing story that describes a little bit of history. Then you can go to statewide supporters to see who has signed on. That's where Bullock and Roscoe are. Montana Outdoor Hall of Fame inductees, previous commission chairman. Then you can go to the grassroots supporters, and you or Jock or I individually can sign on there and provide a testimony. And then the real key is that then there is a candidate link, and every candidate for those House districts and whatever Senate districts are being elected this year will appear. All the Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian. I think one may have had even 5.
I think there's a Green Party candidate too still. And anyway, it's sort of like a spreadsheet format. It doesn't look like a spreadsheet, but they're listed by party and district.
Okay. So as a voter, come election day or election time, I need to be looking at your website to see where people are, candidates are, who support this continuing heritage of our outdoors here in Montana. And that's what you're telling me.
Yep.
And it's not telling you how to vote. It's saying, here's the information.
Here's the people who are on your side on this.
It's purely informative, and I will put in a plug, since I am board chair for C4, and I can do this. I will put in a plug also for Montana Sportsman Alliance. List of endorsements, and is it a scorecard or is it a list of endorsements?
Well, we have both. We have kind of a legislative scorecard and then a list of endorsements.
I think it's important to keep the Montana Conservation Voters also has both, and it's important, I think, because everyone's so busy and can't follow the news and find detail. To me, the scorecard and the way that your elected officials voted on priority bills, that's way more important than the endorsements, because it allows you to make up your own
Yeah.
mind
Yeah, they
and see
monitor.
how they voted instead of how they talk.
Jock and Jeff, we ran out of time.
Surprise, surprise.
Listen,
We're just getting
I so
started.
appreciate what you guys are doing. That elk is still out there, Jock. Go get him tomorrow.
Do something about that.
Thanks, Mike.